I'm Professor Philip Sabin, and this video explains the rules of my free counter-air simulation of modern airbase attacks by showing a complete playthrough of the first of the 5 turns in the game. Counter-air is simpler and quicker than my other simulation designs, like those in my books, Lost Battles and Simulating War, and the complete absence of luck makes it a challenging chess-like contest, accessible even to non-wargamers, such as Air Force personnel. Counter-Air is published by Fight Club International, the grassroots organisation which encourages the use of wargaming to hone the competitive tactical skills of military personnel. It follows on from my equally simple, land-oriented wargame primer, Take That Hill, which has been published by Fight Club in the deluxe expanded boxed edition shown. Both games may be downloaded at no cost from the Fight Club International website. The main aim of Counter-Air is to familiarise users with the many interacting dilemmas and trade-offs which modern air operations involve. It does so in the context of a hypothetical air war between regional states still dependent primarily on crewed jets rather than the advanced uncrewed craft, deep strike missiles and cyber capabilities available to aerospace powers like the United States. This makes it easier for the game to illustrate the fearsome risks posed to aircrew and air defence personnel by the increasingly capable homing missiles which dominate modern air combat. As with Take That Hill, a key feature of Counter-Air is its use of simple, cheap and tactile physical components, instead of the computer software usually associated with modern simulation games. This makes the system rules much more accessible and open to user discussion and modification. The game may also be played using a simple PowerPoint slide as shown, allowing easy demonstration or online contests with no need for the bespoke software used by wargame enthusiasts. Counter-Air pits the numerically superior Blue Air Force, with 10 flights of 2 multi-role jets and a small force of armed uninhabited aerial vehicles, UAVs, against the main Red Air Base, defended by a classic Integrated Air Defence System, IADS, with 4 flights of 2 jet interceptors and 4 batteries each of radar-guided surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, and anti-aircraft artillery, AAA. The blue player launches 5 successive waves of sorties, with the aim of wearing down and crippling the red IADS in a sustained offensive counter-air OCA campaign, without the Blue Air Force being crippled in the process. The red player's objective is to frustrate this aim by a judicious mixture of active resistance and passive evasion of Blue's attacks. Unlike in my other simple designs, such as Blockfight and Schlieffen shown here, Counter-Air has no hidden information, as in classic military Kriegspiel contests. Players governed instead by strict interactive sequencing of the successive actions and decisions available to blue and red, respectively. This removes the random influence of lucky guesses, helps competing players to spot and rectify rules mistakes by their opponents, and allows the game to be played instead by a single user swapping sides to study the dilemmas and tactical options which the simulation presents. Blue's first and most crucial choice in each turn is how to distribute surviving attacking flights between 4 generic OCA missions. This mostly reflects decisions as to which munitions load the multi-role jets should carry in the current sortie. In this illustration, Blue opts to put 3 flights in the high strike box, armed with laser or GPS-guided bombs, to engage targets precisely from above the effective range of red AAA. the blue UAVs also automatically begin in this box. Blue puts one flight in the low strike box, ready to sneak in below the SAM radars and attack targets from close range using specialist runway cratering munitions or retarded bombs which induce drag to slow down and avoid damaging the launch aircraft. This leaves 6 of the 10 blue flights to protect the 4 strike flights from the initially intact red IADs. Blue puts 3 of the flights in the escort box, carrying air-to-air missiles, AAMs, to engage any red interceptors which scramble to protect their airbase. The remaining 3 blue flights start in the suppression of enemy air defense, SEAD, box, and are assumed to carry anti-radiation missiles, ARMs, which home on active SAM radars, or standoff guided missiles like Maverick, which can engage AAA vehicles without the launch aircraft needing to overfly them. Red may now choose how to respond to this attack wave. Letting Red see the blue threat before responding abstractly models the intelligence advantages offered by Red's asymmetric access to ground-based sensors. In this illustration, Red opts to scramble all 4 flights of interceptors, instead of leaving any in their hardened aircraft shelters, HAS, but to activate only 2 of the 4 SAM batteries, with the others keeping their radars switched off to protect them from ARM attack by the 3 blue SEAD flights. AAA is always active unless suppressed by SEAD attack, so no red decisions are needed here. Air combat is resolved first, and occurs by each side in turn having one flight launch its AAMs against enemy jets. Blue fires first, to balance the red advantage from going second in the previous phase. One blue escort flight hence launches its AAMs against a red interceptor flight, and its counter is flipped to its spent side, or has a spent marker placed on it in the PowerPoint version, to show that the flight has now expended its munitions and has no other priority this turn except to evade red attack. Counter-Air presents players with the same awful dilemma faced by real aircrew when their missile warning indicators illuminate to show the approach of enemy AAMs or SAMs, namely, whether to risk pressing on with their own attacks regardless, or to prioritize their own safety by focusing on trying to evade the incoming missiles. The game reflects this dilemma by letting players choose either to take 2 hits or to take just 1 hit and allow their target flight to become spent. In this illustration, Red boldly opts to advance the red hit marker by 2, so that the targeted interceptors may fire back instead of evading. The interceptors opt to seek revenge against an escort rather than a strike flight, in hopes of reducing the number of AAMs which they themselves will face. Their tactic works when Blue opts to make discretion the better part of valor, and to flip the targeted escorts to spent, so that the blue hit marker advances only by 1. Blue now fires the last armed escort flight against another red interceptor flight. This time it is senseless for Red to accept 2 hits, since whenever accumulated hits exceed 3, the target counter is destroyed, so could not launch its own attack in any case. Red hence flips the targeted flight to spent and advances the red hit marker 1 space to 3. The red interceptors may no longer engage the escorts even if they wish to, since all 3 escort flights are now spent and flying out of range. Hence, one of the 2 interceptor flights still armed launches its AAMs against a blue high strike flight instead. Blue opts to have the flight jettison its bombs and become spent, so that the blue hit marker advances only 1 box to 2. Red could use the last armed interceptors to engage the low strike flight, But since this would prompt the blue flight to evade instead of running the gauntlet of the red AAA, the interceptors engage another high strike flight instead. It would be senseless for the blue flight to accept 2 hits and be destroyed, so it too takes 1 hit and becomes spent, leaving both sides with 3 total hits. With all escort and interceptor flights spent, play now moves to the air defense phase. Here again, Blue's seed flights and Red's SAMs and AAA take turns to fire, starting once more with Blue. Blue's priority is to suppress the more potent SAMs, so the first seed flight engages one of the 2 active SAM batteries. This battery automatically takes 1 hit, and would normally become spent into the bargain. But since the hit takes total red hits past 3, the marker cycles back to 0, and the battery is destroyed instead, and shifted to the graveyard box. No red decision is required, as with blue AAM attacks. The game tracks hits on red flights and SAMs collectively, since this creates a smoother rate of counter-destruction than if the hits were tracked separately. The 1 active SAM battery still armed now seeks revenge by engaging its only available target, the 1 unspent blue high strike flight. Blue now has a 3rd response option besides the 2 discussed already, namely to take just 1 hit, but to have an armed seed flight become spent instead of the high strike flight itself. However, in this case, even the single hit will destroy the high strike flight regardless, so it might as well become spent itself beforehand to stop the blue hit marker cycling past 0 to 1. Against interceptors, armed escort flights may become spent in a similar way to save strike flights from jettisoning their munitions. The 1 remaining battery in the active SAM box is now spent after its own attack, and so ineligible as a seed target, as Red anticipated when opting to make just 2 SAM batteries active this turn. Hence, the 2 blue seed flights still armed have no available targets except the red AAA batteries. 1 seed flight duly makes a AAA battery spent, with no red decision required, and no hits scored, since the game assumes that the AAA vehicles are too easily concealed to be worth targeting for permanent elimination, like the more vulnerable SAMs. 1 of the 3 unspent AAA batteries now engages Blue's low strike flight. This flight automatically suffers 1 hit, but it does not have to jettison its munitions to avoid a second hit, as with AAM or SAM attack. The final armed seed flight suppresses a further AAA battery. Although the low strike flight is still armed, the 1 remaining unspent AAA battery cannot engage it again, since a given blue flight may only be engaged once in each air defense phase. This restriction prevents unrealistic ganging up by the air defences, and limits the risks faced by lone strike flights, even without heavy seed support. It is now time for the target engagement phase, allowing blue strike flights which have retained their bombs to attack the airbase at last. Unfortunately for blue, all 3 original high strike flights have become spent or destroyed due to the hail of red AAMs and SAMs, so only the UAVs, which are immune from attack for game purposes, can still inflict damage this turn. Their light munitions may only target SAM batteries, including spent or inactive ones, so they opt to inflict a further hit on the spent battery in the active SAM box. Blue's still armed low strike flight cannot attack the same SAM battery, since no red counter may suffer more than 1 hit in any target engagement phase, to reflect diminishing returns from bombing as surviving targets become scarcer. the flight could inflict a hit on either of the inactive SAM batteries. But Blue decides instead to attack the airbase runway, to stop all 4 interceptor flights scrambling next turn, as they did this turn. This runway attack causes one of the red flights in the intercept box to be shifted to the airbase box while retaining its spent status. The final phase of the turn is the recovery phase. All 9 surviving Blue flights are removed from the map and returned to their airbase, ready to rearm and launch another attack wave next turn. The UAVs are shifted instead to Box 3 of the turn track, since their lower speed will prevent them returning to re-attack until then, by which time one of the crewed Blue flights will have been grounded due to maintenance issues. All AAA batteries are flipped back to armed status, and all 3 surviving SAM batteries are flipped back to armed status and shifted for now to the inactive SAM box. All 4 red flights return for now to the airbase box, and all become armed, except for the flight affected by the runway cratering attack. This flight will become armed again next turn, but cannot take off straight away, and so will be confined to its HAZ, where it may be attacked by a high strike flight using bunker-busting munitions. Both sides suffered 5 hits in this first turn, costing them 1 counter apiece. Blue will win the game after 4 more turns, only if at least 3 more red than blue counters have been destroyed by that time. If red has lost 2 more counters, then whichever side currently has fewer hits gains a narrow victory. It takes repeated play to discover the best tactics to defeat a canny opponent, and I've deliberately focused this video on illustrating how the game mechanics work, rather than on demonstrating the best tactics to adopt. Counter-air is simple enough that it should be possible for an instructor to explain the rules using the PowerPoint slide, and then get his or her students to split into competing pairs and play one another using multiple hard copies of the game, with the instructor circulating to resolve queries as required. The game plays quickly enough that there should be time in a 2-hour class for players to swap sides and command red and blue in turn, before a final wash-up session to discuss the game's strengths and limitations as a model of real counter-air operations. As I said earlier, most people today associate simulation with computer software, not manual board games. Top-down, rather than first-person computer games of modern air combat include the real-time simulations, Command Modern Operations, and the modern air power games by the late John Tiller, as well as the PC conversion of the turn-based board game Hornet Leader. These games are all far more detailed and less abstract than Counter-Air, but this has the downside that they also take much longer to learn and play properly. Computer games also have the disadvantages that they require appropriate hardware, and are much harder to tweak or adapt if one disagrees with any aspect of the programmed rules. Most of the many other manual games of air combat have a more historical focus than Counter-Air. This includes my own several designs on the subject, starting with my World War II games, Angels 1-5 and Big Week, published in my 2012 book, Simulating War. My most similar air combat design to Counter-Air is Fighter Duel Lite, which I plan to showcase in my next gameplay video. This is even simpler than Counter-Air, and also has no guessing games or random die rolls after initial deployment, making it just as tense a chess-like contest of pure player skill. It focuses on duels between flights of 2 to 4 generic monoplane fighters in World War II, and requires players or teams to master cooperative formation tactics, including energy management, rather than the individual aerobatic maneuvers which dominate first-person computer games. Fighter Duel Lite may be played either with counters on a hex grid or, more atmospherically, with aircraft models on Perspex stands. For something more modern, you may care to examine my Jet Duel game, which covers similar tactical fighter contests during the Cold War. This is rather more detailed and complex, but models the distinctive characteristics of particular jet types, including F-15s, F-18s, MiG-29s and Su-27s, with their all-aspect missiles and advanced sensor and countermeasure systems. The game includes provision for the mock combats which increasingly took the place of real aerial duels, and it also allows any or all jets to be controlled by my unique manual AI rules, if desired. Jet Duel is already showcased in its own video, focused on an asymmetric contest between MiG-17s and F-4Cs early in the Vietnam War. I hope you've enjoyed this short introduction to counter-air and related air combat games of potential utility to Air Force personnel as well as wargame enthusiasts. For more details of my dozens of designs, including those on air warfare, just Google Sabin Wargames or watch the other videos on my YouTube channel.